For most of human history, war was brutal, but it was cheap. Not normal cheap, obviously. Logistically cheap. Armies were made of men who already existed. Weapons were tools they already owned. Campaigns were seasonal, short, and limited by hunger, weather, and distance. Kings didn't need accountants to fight wars. They needed loyalty, horses, and time. They one invention changed everything. Gunpowder didn't just make a war deadlier, it made war expensive. And once war became expensive, it stopped being a test of courage and turned into a test of finance. Welcome to Money Chronicles, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Before gunpowder, power was scattered. Medieval Europe was a messy patchwork of lords, vassals, and personal loyalties. Armies were temporary, peasants were called to fight, then sent home to harvest crops. Knights brought their own armor. Castles were built to defend, not to conquer. War had natural limits because the people fighting still needed to live normal lives. No treasure could support endless conflict because none had to push too far, and armies fell apart. Food ran out, loyalty cracked, the system forced restraint all on its own. Then gunpowder arrived quietly in late medieval Europe. At first, it didn't look impressive. Early cannons were unbelievable. Early guns were slow and inaccurate. The old elite laughed at them. Loud, loud toys, they thought. They were wrong, not because gunpowder killed night, but because it killed cheap war. Cannons changed size overnight. Stone walls that had to protect cities for centuries crumble under bombardment. Suddenly, fortifications had to be redesigned, thicker, lower, angled. That meant engineers, materials, time, money. Firearms changed armies to training a knight took a lifetime, training a musketeer took months, but only if you could afford the weapons, powder, supply chains, and constant resupply. Wars were no longer fought with what soldiers carried on their backs. They were fought with what state could deliver to the front. War stopped being local, it became industrial. Standing armies replaced feudal reliefs. Soldiers weren't farmers anymore, they were professionals who needed year round pay. Armies didn't disband after campaigns, they stayed, drilled, ate resources, even pacetime. Victory no longer went to the bravest, it went to whoever could keep paying. This is when power started to centralize. Local lords couldn't afford cannons, small kingdoms couldn't maintain modern fortresses, feud obligations weren't enough to fund permanent war. Only centralized state with predictable income could survive. Gunpowder didn't just destroy castles, it destroyed decentralization. And once rules realized war no required money, they faced a new problem. Where do we get it? Temporary taxes weren't enough. Emergency leaves couldn't support permanent armies, so state did something radical. They normalized taxation. What used to be occasional become constant. What used to be negotiated become expected. People didn't just owe loyalty anymore. They owed money. Still it was enough. Gunpowder wars were massive. Long, relentless cannons, powder fortress ships, soldiers, taxes alone couldn't cover it. So government turned to borrowing. This is where finance truly enters the story. States started using debt not as a last resort, but as a strategy. Bonds funded wars, credit became a weapon, bankers replaced nobles as the king's most important allies. A ruler who could borrow could fight no longer than a ruler who couldn't, even if the second rule was more loved. War stopped being limited by people, it became limited by credit, and that changed everything. Once wars could be financed, they could last longer than public patience. Cost could be pushed into the future. Losses could be delayed. Inflation could quietly absorb part of the pain. Entire population could be mobilized financially without ever touching a battlefield. This is the birth of the modern state. Permanent taxes, standing armies, public debt, centralized authority. None of this came from philosophy. It came from necessity. Gunpowder made war so expensive to fight the old way. The human cost was huge. Peasants paid higher taxes. Wages lagged behind prices. Saving lost value. Debts outlived kings and were passed to people who never voted for the wars. Still, the system survived because it worked. Gunpowder re- rewired the cost of war, and in doing so, it rewired the relationship between money and power forever. Once war became permanent, states faced a problem they never had before. They couldn't pay it. Rising taxes too high risked revolt. Borrowing too much risked revolt. Cutting military spending meant falling behind rivals, so government got subtle. They changed how the cost of war was felt. This is where inflation enters the story, not by accident, not as a modern invention, but as a structured solution. Inflation existed before. Ancient rules clipped coins to survive crises, but that was dangerous. People noticed. Trust collapsed. Soldiers refused pay. Markets froze. Regime fails. Gunpowder changed the math. War was no longer short, it was permanent. States needed a way to spread its cost quietly, slowly, invisibly. Inflation did exactly that. Instead of talking more money directly, governments changed that money was worth. Instead of demanding more today, they demand less tomorrow. The burden didn't vanish, it dissolved. Before gunpowder, inflation solved emergencies. After gunpowder, inflation managed systems. Cannons were out, powder spoiled, fortresses needed upkeep, armies consumed resources daily. Taxes couldn't keep up, debt filled the gap, but debt created another problem repayment. Inflation quietly solved that too. When prices rise, all debt shrink in real terms, creditor get paid, but with weaker money. Backlash stays low. The mechanism is visible. Wars become social survivable. This is why inflation become persistent. Not hyperinflation, not collapse, just steady erosion. Enough to ease pressure, enough to buy time, enough to keep the machine running. And once this logic exists, it spreads. Military spending becomes permanent. Debt rolls forward. Inflation becomes normal. Financial system evolve to manage pressure, not remove it. Central authority grows stronger, not weaker. This is the real legacy of gunpowder. Not just bigger wars, but financialized war. Violence no longer needed consist. It needed liquidity. Resistance could be outlasted, cost postponed, sacrificed spirits across everyone, people who never fought this still. Savings quietly shrank, wages lagged, generation inherited debts from wars they never chose. War felt distance not because it matters less, but becomes but because its cost was hidden. That's why modern state feels so durable. Today war isn't limited by manpower, it's limited by budgets. Aircraft carriers, satellites, cyber system, supply chains. These are financial commitments as much as military ones. The question isn't who fights best, it's who can afford to keep fighting. Where's the uncomfortable truth? The restraint rarely comes from morality, it comes from cost. And when cost is hidden, delayed, or discussed, restraint weaknesses. War becomes structural, built into system designed to sustain it. That why debt, inflation, and public finance are never just economic topics. They are tools of power. They allow force without collapse. They are the legacy of a world where gunpowder taught real a brutal lesson. Whoever controls finance controls endurance. Understanding this isn't cynical, it's realistic. So when people ask why government borrows so much, why military budgets never shrink, why inflation eats savings, why wars feel disconnected from daily life, the answer isn't in today's news. It's burnt centuries back. In the moment, technology made violence too expensive to manage informally. Gunpowder didn't just change war, it changed what power needs to survive. Systems evolve around the cost they must absorb. When those costs grow large enough, they reshape everything institutions, money, lives. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes with brutal consistency. When power gets expensive, money steps in, and once that bridge exists, it's rarely torn down. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I will show you where to look.